Welcome back for another episode of 3 on 3 at 3 with Greater Regional Alliance of Realtors, Top Realtors. Today, we are doing April 13th Fair Housing Month. And I'm Sherlynn with RE/MAX of Grand Rapids. And we have here
Becky Berke. I'm the Director of Legal Education at Michigan Realtors.
James Cristbrook. I travel for NAR speaking on diversity and the former chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee at NAR.
Jamecia, Associate Broker of Keller Williams Grand Rapids East, and also First Vice President of ROMA, which is a local chapter of NARAB, National Association of Real Estate Brokers.
Wonderful. And I'm also going to do a plug for WCR. I'm the 2023 President for Women's Council of Realtors, which has a cultural diversity pillar. So, are you able to share with us your personal fair housing story?
Yeah, and I guess I'll start by saying that my story is probably a little bit different than some other fair housing advocates. I'll start by saying that I've never experienced discrimination in housing, or at least I haven't, to my knowledge. So my story is not really one of having a negative experience. It's really probably more of one of learning and re-educating myself. I grew up in a very small rural town in northern Michigan where there was little to no diversity present. And then when I went to college, it was also in the UP, which is also a place with, little to no diversity. So my first experience with diversity was really when I went to law school at Michigan State. And it was a culture shock, to say the least. And I learned really quickly that the world did not exist only in that narrow scope that I had always been used to. So my fair housing story is really one of education and learning, learning empathy, learning compassion, learning the importance of diversity and why all of that is so important. And so a little bit different, but I'm happy to be a part of this and a part of the discussion, even though, my story might be a little bit different.
I think that's a great point, Becky, that you bring up, is that for so many people, there's really not a personal experience, but that need or that want to be like an ally and understand it and educate, I think is extraordinary. I can talk about when I bought my first house. Now, this was 1989, but still relevant today. In the Homeowners Association documents, it said specifically that a home could only be sold to a white person, nobody of color. And I wouldn't close on my house until this was addressed. And I went to the city and they addressed it. However, we still see that today. We still see these covenants in Homeowners Association documents. So I think that's a big ongoing problem. I can take it beyond that with being a gay man. My husband and I have kids. That was not easy to achieve, but up until very recently, I could be discriminated based on sexual orientation or gender identity in housing. That just changed a lot thanks to Becky and her team, where the governor signed Senate Bill 4, and that changed a lot in housing in the state.
Jamecia, why do you believe that fair housing is still relevant in this country?
It is so important because everyone, no matter your race, your sexual orientation, your marital status, it is important that everyone deserves a beautiful place to live, no matter where it is. If you can afford to purchase, you should be able to afford to live there. So it shouldn't be a rule. It's just something that shouldn't be even said. I mean, I can think of a million and 10 stories probably that I can come up with. But so I, rather not even go down the line because I probably would take up the whole hour or so. but being an African American female, I see it on both sides. So yeah, it's very, very important that we have those laws in place to protect everyone.
And I'd like to clarify.
Yeah.
NAR added to our code of ethics, we go back to like 2014, sexual orientation and gender identity. So as a realtor, we've been, as always, ahead of the game, at least over the past few decades. And I think that needs to be pointed out, that as realtors, we are held to a higher standard and should be.
Absolutely. And that code of ethics holds us to that higher standard, and that's what differentiates us. So, in your experience, what areas do you see the highest potential of fair housing violations?
I'm going to say something James said earlier. He said that how he keeps very meticulous records. So that could actually, whether you realize or not, that could really cause a major issue if you're not keeping accurate records, making sure that you treat everybody the same in documenting your process and your procedures. So when you said that earlier, off camera when we were talking, that is very important that you do keep good records, because sometimes you're thinking you can do one thing for one person, another thing for another person, and that could be just discrimination.
Absolutely, and that is, part of avoiding fair housing issues are keeping meticulous notes. It reminds us of what we've accomplished. And one of the things that folks can do is there's Fairhaven, which is at NAR.Realtor, an extraordinary simulator, and it talks about those types of things, of keeping that. I think there are things that we can't control, and quite frequently people kind of step accidentally into a fair housing issue without kind of realizing they got there, which is a shame on one hand, and on the other hand, perfectly understandable. And one of those things recently, or it's happened recently again and happens in a very active market, is buyers providing what we call love letters or cry letters. Those can very easily lead to fair housing issues. So I think that's one of our biggest issues today is helping our sellers understand its price and terms. Always talk about the house and not the people who would live there, and I think you're pretty safe.
Exactly.
Money is green. Let's focus on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And price and terms.
Yes,
I mean,
price and terms.
that's
Yes.
it's a business. That's what we do.
And
Shouldn't matter.
I think that client education piece is so important, because what's so often misunderstood is that, people think that the Fair Housing Act only applies to people who are actively working in the housing industry, realtors, lenders, title companies, but a seller can violate the Fair Housing Act, a buyer can violate the Fair Housing Act, and I think that if realtors are having those conversations with their clients, like, you mentioned the buyer love letters, often, if you explain to a seller what the risks are in accepting a letter like that, then, no, they don't want to violate the Fair Housing Act, or at least most of them don't. And there might be bad apples out there, but I don't think they're out there actively trying to discriminate against buyers. So I think that just, explaining the issues is such a big piece of that.
As we know, implicit bias exists. We have a whole process now at NAR, and one could say, I'm not, making that decision based on those things, but you may be. And we should make it clear that if a realtor is involved in that in any way, shape, or form and has any knowledge of it, you're complicit. It's contributing to the issue. And I think it's important as well that our realtors understand what the 7 protected classes federally are, and then the Elliott Larson Act, which adds more protected classes and was just amended, was it 2 weeks ago?
Really recently.
Yeah, it was.
Such thing as unconscious bias. You're thinking, oh, I'm not biased. Yeah. sometimes
Everybody is.
Everybody is. You may not do it like willfully, or I'm just going to be prejudiced against something, but you are unconscious by it just because of the environment that you grew up in, the surroundings, and the company that you keep on a day-to-day basis. So.
And it's, once we all understand we have it, that's why we call our latest, I call it an experience, it's called bias override. Because we need to just learn how to deal with them and not make decisions based on those things, as opposed to explicit bias, which is just outright, someone knows what they're doing and they act on it.
I think that's such a cool training, because, from a legal perspective, the lack of intent is not a defense to a fair housing claim. A seller or a realtor or whoever it is can say, well, I didn't mean to discriminate. I didn't know that, this was a bad act, but that's not going to get you out of a fair housing violation just because you didn't mean to do it, or you didn't know that that's what you were doing. So I think that training is super helpful.
It is.
Because I had a lender say he wasn't realizing what he was saying to the client. He just basically said, well, I don't know, I think that's a risky area, and I've never did a loan in that area. And the client immediately said, I think you're maybe serious.
Can we talk about redlining and steering and
and that's what I mean, real life.
Yeah.
It's like, oh well, I really wasn't meaning that way, and I honestly don't think he was really intentionally saying that, but that was just his opinion.
And my question would be, well, what did you mean?
Well,
I
pretty
didn't mean
much.
it that way. Then what did you
right.
mean? You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, one of the issues, like from working with the Michigan Realtors legal hotline, one of the big issues we see are problems with advertising. I wanted to make sure that we talked about that when we talk about potential fair housing violations, because now I think that the issues with advertising aren't so much blatant discrimination, but I think what realtors have to be cognizant of is that your ads for housing cannot state or imply
Right.
a preference for housing. They can't make buyers or of a certain protected class feel like they are unwelcome or unwanted, and so we have to look at the context of how those ads are perceived, and a word on its face might not be discriminatory, but when you align it with other visuals and change the context, maybe it could be. So I just wanted everybody to be aware of the perception of their advertisements, because that's a big complaint that we see coming through.
Education.
Yeah.
And we do see that in many ways where and this is where we talk about belonging. That if we should want to cast the widest net for our
Absolutely.
for the public, for our customers and clients, for sellers and buyers, especially when we're representing a seller. So why would we limit our conversation? And one of the things we've seen is that in advertising, now this is more subjective, but sometimes we need to be this way, is what are we representing on our websites? Do we show a variety of folks? Do we show a variety of folks that represent the community we're selling in, or what's that demographic? And I think that's sometimes just that subliminal thing
Exactly.
of what, I don't see myself there, so how could I be there?
Exactly. Yeah, because I always tell my clients, you have to make a person feel like that's their home as well.
Yep.
You can't
Exactly.
make them feel like it's just me and no more, just me and my kind, or however you want to word it.
Right.
But you just have to be very, very careful in what you say and how you advertise that, because people want to be able to see themselves in that space, and they have I think everyone deserves the right to make that choice.
Yeah, and still to this day, as a gay man, and I live in the Detroit area, people will say to me, well, where do all the gay people live? Well, we live everywhere.
As it turns out.
But, right, I've heard people say, oh, you should live here. Well, I have kids and all those types of things, so maybe that's not for me. And I think that happens so many times. And then I feel like, oh my goodness, this realtor doesn't get me or understand me. And they're making assumptions based on who I am or what I look like.
And even as an African American person, period, we have to be careful when we're working with clients that are African American as well, because you get comfortable. Where's all the blacks live? I want to be in that neighborhood. That's a cool neighborhood. Well, that's all white neighborhood is like, I don't really see any of So even though you're talking to someone of your same ethnicity as you are, you still have to be careful on how you have that conversation.
And I think part of that is understanding socioeconomic issues, because there are folks who may not want to sell in an area or represent an area or take buyers in an area, and not because it's not their market, but because there's this assumption that this is the case. And until we start to, realtors become actively involved in creating generational wealth, which a lot of times that doesn't happen because of discriminatory acts. So,
Absolutely.
And it makes sense. If I can own my home, then my children can. But if I was kept from owning my home, whether it's source of income or the area I'm in, that just promotes generational poverty, and that's not something realtors should ever want.
And I'm happy you mentioned that, because I think that that's something that's finally being talked about. I mean, that's always been an issue.
Right.
That's never not been the case. And so I think that the fact that everybody's at least having a conversation about it now is, I mean, it's at least moving it in the right direction. I don't know what, the ultimate solution is, but I think it's good to have conversations about it.
It's great to have a conversation about it. It's just about, if you don't have that conversation, it's not going to change anything. But you have to educate. And I know that in the Black community, we have to educate I hate to say our people, but we have to educate the African Americans to the importance of building generational wealth. So sometimes we fall short because we've seen our grandmothers and great-grandmothers always rent and not knowing the value of that responsibility of building that generational wealth.
And I think that the aspect of that that's important is that we are involved in that it's not just how do we stay out of trouble, but it's also how do we get to a better place. Exactly. And I think that's the other side of the coin here. You know, if I always have this fear and I just try to focus on, well, I don't want to stay out of trouble, that sets a very low baseline for me. How do we take it to the next level?
Have a conversation.
Yeah, have a conversation. And as realtors, we're incumbent on doing that. I mean, you know, you want to solve a shortage in inventory right now, get more people to sell their home, to buy a home, to get it more active, because we know when first-time home buyers come into the picture, everything goes up from there. And we do have to focus on underserved communities. It's not, you know, and it's over 50 years since the assassination of Dr. King, which led to the signature, and in fact it was just last week was the anniversary.
Yeah.
And yet we are still having this conversation.
You know, and the sad part about it is that before we start having the conversation, if you look at the historical statistics, African Americans we are less homeowners than we were before. It was 23%, now it's 26%. So instead of going down, we're going up.
Yep.
Wow. So we need to make that change, and that's where NARAB comes in, because we're trying to educate the community, educate them. Okay, this is what it takes, and it starts from credit repair. It's just knowledge. Sometimes lack of knowledge, we fail. So it's disheartening for me to see that, but it's a real fact. It's a real fact. Yeah. And I don't know if it's because of not just lack of knowledge. I don't know if it's because of the discriminations that have gone on. That's why it's so important that we have those laws in place, because you get it from appraisers, lenders, sometimes realtors, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest about it. That's the case, because you find some realtors will say, hey, well, I'm going to show them over here, or, you know. So we just have to have that open conversation and hold people accountable of their actions.
And NAREB is so good at doing that. And for folks that don't know, so NAR has 4 multicultural groups that we are directly affiliated with. NAREB is one of them, Black and African American folks. NAREP, who are Hispanic.
I was like, the Hispanic community
yeah.
has made
ARIA,
great leaps in their housing statistically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where-
And you know, in little over 10 years, the majority of the population in the United States will be Hispanic.
Yeah.
We've got Asian and Pacific Islander group, ARIA, that they, you know, during COVID suffered great discrimination. And then the LGBTQ plus alliance, you know, and you can, I'm a member of NAREB, ARIA, NAREP, the alliance, and I was president of the state of Michigan Women's Council of Realtors.
Oh, nice.
Back when, you know, 2010.
Okay.
You can become an ally. You learn so much from these organizations.
This is not like a pre-programmed plug or anything for either of you guys, but I mean, I think maybe it'd be helpful if you could tell people are there ways to partner with those groups, like for local associations or brokerages, if they want to be allies? Is there a way to work?
I know what she's plugging here.
You do not have to be African American to be a part of NARAB or Roma. It's anybody. I mean, if you are active in the real estate industry, an affiliate, we're stronger together. So the more, the merrier. If we partner together and have those networking events and those networking conversations, you can get a lot more work done if we do it all together, instead of saying, I'm going to stay in my corner and you stay in yours. But if we can all come together, we can change a lot of numbers. We can just make a lot more things happen when we all work together. So it's great to hear, because somebody say that, oh my God, I just thought you can't be,
You're kind of foolish if you don't. I mean, when I got involved with Women's Council, everybody's like, you're a man, why are you there? It's because I'm unique in the room.
Exactly. Yes. Honestly, we have a joke in Women's Council where it was like we have 13,000 members nationwide, and 10% of those are men, because we only take the good ones.
Well, you're a good one.
So you're one of the good ones. See?
I didn't know.
You're one of the good ones.
That's good to hear all along. And, so part of Becky's question, I think, might have been, when a local association can affiliate with a group like NAREB. Now, there aren't multicultural groups everywhere. The two in Michigan are NAREB and the Alliance. But you can partner and get a grant from NAR to teach about fair housing.
Okay.
There's a $5,000 grant, a diversity grant, up to $5,000 that you can apply for, and it's pretty simple. And then there's a $7,500 fair housing grant that you can apply for, and it's fairly simple. It just has to be an association working with Women's Council or NAREB or any group like that.
We have our local chapter,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
we'll definitely be applying for that.
Well, it's a great opportunity to bring the fair housing education to
Because
your
it-
association.
It definitely
Yeah.
needs to happen.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, with no question. Because it's all about education. Because a lot of people, it's just a lack of knowledge. It's not so much, I don't think that people are intentionally being discriminatory to people. Some people just don't know.
Right.
And honestly, I believe what you said in the beginning, there are parts of Grand Rapids where you can be in your silo and be very successful and not have to
Go outside. Yeah.
go outside. So it's just, that's their life story.
Absolutely.
So you have to be intentional to go out and to educate yourself and to become an ally. And even with all due respect, not everyone will be an ally, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's not what we're asking you to do.
No.
But we're asking you to do your job as a realtor and respect the code of ethics by educating yourself.
Exactly.
And I think some people just don't know where to start. You know, maybe they want to learn more, and they don't know where to go. So I think sometimes it's helpful if a local association or a brokerage or whoever it might be, if they kind of bring it to their members, you know, not that you're being, you know, forced into a room to listen to us talk about this stuff, but, you know, some people just don't know how to get the ball rolling. So if we're proactive about, you know, creating those partnerships, then, you know.
And it's all, all real estate is local. And so, NAR, it might seem like an NAR, the tail wags the dog. By intent. We do so much on a local level that we've kind of been given some autonomy. We work with our state association. So it's, having that ability to bring it to our folks is a very special, important thing that we do.
Can you share about your experience with Defy this past year?
It was interesting and enlightening. I was so happy to see that we're having it here on the local level. It was a great experience, just being able to educate people, to give them the knowledge, because some people, when they took the fair housing to get involved in that, they were like, "Wow, I didn't realize that was a no-no." They just didn't know. So again, I'm going to go back to education. Education is so important. Having those conversations are so important. And not being afraid or not being intimidated, thinking, "Oh, I don't want to offend somebody." But sometimes just having that simple conversation is so refreshing. Like, oh, that person really do care, and they genuinely want to get involved. So it was a great experience just getting the education out.
And it represents a respectful, judgment-free kind of conversation, because that's really where we need to be with this. And I think you said something great a few minutes ago. We're stronger together.
Absolutely.
Because there's intersectionality throughout NAR, throughout all of our local associations. So, stronger together is absolutely how we need to approach this.
Absolutely.
What should someone do if they believe they have experienced housing discrimination?
Notify your local fair housing.
Yeah, I'd say.
Come on, attorney.
Okay,
What do
I'm
we
ready.
do?
Yeah, that's right. Let's give it to the attorney. What do we do?
How long do we have? I'd say, number one, reach out to local fair housing centers. They process those complaints, and they honestly move much faster than the state government does a lot of times. I think you should.
Don't say.
Shocking. The government moves slower.
We love Michigan. We love our government. But yeah.
You're doing a great job.
You're doing great. So I would say definitely start by reaching out to the local fair housing centers. They can, walk you through the complaint process. They're great resources in general, but also, there is a state, licensing division where you can submit those complaints to. So the thing too with some of this is it's kind of a self-policing industry. There aren't really fair housing police out patrolling for bad actors and violations. I mean, maybe, in some circumstances there are, law firms who look for those kind of cases to take on. But a lot of the complaints just start with a fair housing center or, filing it with the state. So I think that we have to be proactive in actually, filing, those violations, or else nothing happens and nothing changes.
Unfortunately, I've had the opportunity to have to contact the local fair housing, and unfortunately, it was rectified, and my clients decided not to proceed. But I will say this: they were very proactive. Our local fair housing.
Fair Housing Center of West Michigan.
They were very proactive in reaching back out to me and say, "Hey, didn't hear from your client," so they're definitely about doing the right thing.
And they're busy organizations
Exactly.
these
But the
days,
fact that she picked up the
unfortunately.
phone to call me to follow up said a lot to me. That
Right.
so it wasn't just a complaint that they kind of filed away. So they're actively doing what they're supposed to do.
And if one doesn't know how to do that research and find it, any local association should be able to direct you to those, or Becky and her team at Michigan Realtors will direct you to those, because there's some that are statewide. Equality Michigan is one of those, and there's some that are local. And when we talk about some of these things, I think it's important to know that NAR is the largest trade association in the country. We're somewhere around 1.6 million right now, which is huge. NAREB is the oldest minority trade association in the
75
country. So we've got some real history and strength here. So educating on the basis of fair housing and its importance, and hopefully you can edit this out if I'm speaking out of turn, but Michigan Realtors is working on not adding, but creating an hour of fair housing within continuing education.
Yes, yeah, we're working on that. Hopefully, we'll be getting. Actually, the Michigan Realtors Public Policy Committee is meeting as we speak.
Okay.
So hopefully, we'll be getting legislation introduced pretty soon. It wouldn't add continuing education. They wouldn't add an additional hour to the total education, which I wouldn't be mad about.
Folks, but we could.
It would, you would still have the required 2 hours of legal every year. This would just make one required elective be 1 hour of fair housing every year, which, education isn't, the only way to solve all the problems, but that's definitely a good place to start to be, proactive.
Yeah, when our state association, and I can promise you, Michigan Realtors, stepped up for the gay community, has filed briefs with the Michigan Supreme Court in support of equality. But when you think about the seriousness that Michigan Realtors, NAR, even local associations, in Grand Rapids, you guys have a certification, your own local
Yes.
certification, which is
We created
huge.
in the year of 2000. It started when America was having its racial reawakening, and it started with just literally a Zoom call because we couldn't meet in person, to now we have over 175 of our local members certified through
Wow.
DEFI, Diversity, Equity, Fair Housing, and Inclusion. And it's a 3-part series. The first one is fair housing, taking Fairhaven. The second one is part legal and fair housing. We'll have Brian Westron from Michigan Realtors, or we have the Fair Housing Center of West Michigan, which that part is very important because one, you get local and factual things that actually happened.
Right.
So real examples of what to do and what not to do. Like just that one's always needed. And then we've had a third speaker, Gracie Harkema, with implicit bias
she's
training.
great,
Yeah, she's
great
she's
too.
phenomenal.
We will be having that again this year. But what's one step everyone can leave here with to educate themselves to make sure they are practicing fair housing in their real estate industry?
Who wants to start?
I'll start. I would say I think just having an open mind and being open to new experiences and learning from other people's stories, and maybe just stepping outside of your own box and realizing that there's more going on than just right here. So I think that's, I guess, first step is and being ready and able to seek out education on your own. I think self-education is a big first step for everybody.
Yeah, and I think it's like in almost anything, knowing there's a problem. Because if we know there's a problem, then we can take the next step. And what I'd say is share what you've learned. Don't be afraid to share what you've learned with other realtors that Don't just learn it here in an auditorium and then then not take it home to your broker or to other realtors, just assuming that they would know these things. And I think also we need to consider speaking to the heart and speaking to the soul. Fair housing is very subjective, in my opinion. We need to really not just think about the law and make sure. I remember at NAR there was a session once, it was how to stay out of prison. Not kidding you. But important.
Yeah.
But she never spoke about taking it to your heart and your soul, which is what it's actually written into the diversity strategic plan for NAR as of last year.
You kind of stole what I was going to say. Similar.
Sorry.
A little bit.
You should have gone first.
But I would say this. Always walk in integrity, right?
Yep.
Because if you're walking in integrity, you know that you're going to be doing the right thing, right? Because I always tell my kids, they're adults now, but I always tell them, look, no matter what you do, no matter what somebody do to you, you can retaliate, which is not always not the good thing. Because at the end of the day, even though you may say, oh, I did this because they did this to me, you know right here whether you were wrong or not. And you may be justified on paper because this person said this to me and I had to get them back, but no. Because at the end of the day, God is not going to say to you, but he's going to say, what did you do? Did you do the right thing? So if you know in your heart that you didn't do the right thing, you know, because you can say all the day long, like, oh yeah, but they made me so mad and they did this to me and I had to get them back. But was it the right thing to do?
Right.
So you know, like you said, it's a heart. So you know right here whether you're right or you're wrong. You can justify it all day long, but if you're right, you're right, and you're wrong, you're wrong.
Exactly.
That's a good
Yeah.
one. I'm gonna take that with me. I might steal that. That's really good.
Two things to add here. I would say the first thing is GRAR has made it as passed last year that every new realtor member, as part of their orientation, now has to take Fair Haven.
Good.
Yes. So that means that all of us experienced realtors, one thing that you can do if you have not done so already is take Fair Haven. And then
it's free.
And it's free.
And it's fun.
It actually is fun.
Yeah.
This is pretty cool. It
Yeah,
feels like a
exactly.
game.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, in order to make this personal, it's go sit across the table with someone who is different than you, whether that is culture, where they worship, who they love, but go learn, be intentional about learning something outside of your circle and meet somewhere different, not your go-to place. So that can be your neighbor, if you have neighbors who moved in that you never talked to, or someone who loves someone different than you or worships in a different way. But just go sit across the table and really take it home, because it's not just about our job. We're realtors and peoples too.
Yeah, I like being intentional.
Yeah.
And finding any of these things, learn to go to nar.realtor. That's our website. That's where you'll find Fairhaven, the implicit bias video, C2EX, At Home with Diversity, which are all great programs that help us. I don't like to always say stay out of trouble, but be better at what we do and be more cognizant of respecting other folks.
Thank you all for your time today, and see you guys next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peace and love.